tell us a little bit about, just to level set, your cultural background, your upbringing, and where you're from.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
It's not how this goes, Laura.
We're already off script. Can you tell them how we met?
Oh, it's me being a creep.
No, it's what this is all about, right?
Yeah, so we both go to Onnit, which shout out to Onnit, who here goes to Onnit? Yeah. And I think it was my first week, and I was just kind of looking through Instagram and clicking, and I clicked in. They had shared one of your stories, and I clicked in, and I saw your bio, and I was like, that sounds awesome. And I was like, I know I'm going to be friends with this girl, but I don't know when. And then we ended up in the same small group together, and it didn't click for me that it was you until like a couple months in. And then, yeah, now we're friends.
Now we're here.
And now we're celebrating our joint businesses.
Yeah. So I remember meeting Kate as well. I remember trying to stalk her on social media. It turns out she already followed me and I didn't know. It's like, let's just be honest, we all do it. Like if we're gonna be real. But our businesses aligned so much, and she had her first open spaces event in the fall that I attended, and so I've been in your shoes in terms of showing up and feeling like I didn't know anyone, and walked in and was like, I kind of know Kate, but I kind of don't, and like this is really cool. And so I made amazing connection and left just feeling really excited. And then she was like, do you want to be a speaker? And I was like, wait, me? And she was like, yeah, duh. And so I just feel really honored to be here with you all tonight. And I just really appreciate you and the fact that we're able to use this as like not only to promote open spaces, but that you were kind enough to share it with just okay, and it'd be like kind of like my kickoff. So thank you, and thank y'all for being here. It's a little different when I have all these faces looking at me. I mean, I teach, which I'll answer to go to your question about my upbringing. So I'm a Kentucky girl. If you've spent any time with me, it's something I mention very frequently. I'm very proud of the state that I was raised in. But I've also spent some time in Denver right before moving to Austin in 2019. I am trained as an oncology pharmacist. So I went to pharmacy school at University of Kentucky. I did a couple extra years in school of residency, which was oncology focused, and actually came to Austin for a job in oncology pharmacy, where I worked in a clinic and then taught at the College of Pharmacy for University of Texas. We have a lot of those people in the room. I won't necessarily say go Horns just yet because I'm still a Kentucky fan. But in that job, I had the opportunity to work with students and then also work with cancer patients, which you'll hear a little bit more about my story in probably a few questions. But I still teach part-time at the University of Texas, so I'm very excited and thrilled that they have me on as part-time, so I'm able to do that and kind of pour into students. But I did leave the clinical practice, even though that's my training and background.
What drew you into the medical field and oncology originally?
Yeah, so if you hear a little bit more of my story, you might think I chose that path because of my husband, who was diagnosed with cancer. But I was actually interested in it before. And so if we talk at some other time, I can tell you all the coincidences that kind of lined up with just kind of the story and things that I feel like were meant to be. I'm still struggling with the everything happens for a reason statement, but there are things that I feel like were pieced together in that weren't coincidence. But I actually was interested in pharmacy school and oncology or cancer care even before he was diagnosed with cancer. And so that just happened to line up. I think what drew me in was just the people, wanting to help people. And I think all of us here relate to that in some form or fashion of wanting to find purpose in what we do and to help people. I worked at a small pharmacy in high school, and when I quit the job, I realized that I missed the people and the interactions of just being able to like have conversations, get to know them, and figure out how I could help in the best way. So that's what drew me there.
And so can you explain a little bit about what point you were on your path of becoming an oncology pharmacist when you met your husband, and a little bit about the early days of your relationship?
Yeah, so growing up in Kentucky, very small town, get married young. So I met him when I was 19, and we ended up getting married about a year and a half later. So I was married at the age of 21, and at the time, he was 4 years older than me, but I was like, hey, I'm going to pharmacy school. So like we're either doing this or we're not. Like I'm going to pharmacy school, and I was an undergrad at the time. And so I knew I was going to have to move. And so those were conversations that we had to have early on. So can you remind me the second part of the question.
What was the early days of your relationship with him like? How'd you meet? What was the like?
Yeah, so I think we met through mutual friends. I actually met him and he was leaving. It was his going away party. And then he ended up he moved away and hated it and came back. So I said it was because he met me, obviously. But I was very young and very determined. And so a lot of our relationship was me being in school and saying, we'll have this later. We'll get to enjoy married life later, or we'll get to do that, have a normal life later. I was taking 23 and 26-hour semesters. I had a part-time job. He was a middle school math teacher, and teachers work a lot. Like, they're busy. So always lesson planning, always in a training or some sort of certification. So our relationship looked a lot like me still not being fully an adult while he was, because I was figuring out school and just trying to get through school. And it was always about just getting through. And not necessarily like living in the present. But there were a lot of good moments and good memories, a lot of good shared experiences, a lot of family time, and just kind of pushing through spending time together when we could, but pushing through the school and residency portion. Did that answer the question? Okay.
And then and in terms of the timeline, at what point was your husband diagnosed and what was it like?
Yeah, so if I'll give you a little background about pharmacy school. So if anyone has questions, also if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense, this is informal, so you can raise your hand and ask, because I'm always talking to people that maybe portions don't make sense. But pharmacy school, you do undergrad, so like 3.5 to 4 years. And then pharmacy school's 4 years. So there's 3 years in the classroom, and then the 4th year you do rotations. So then during my 4th year, he started having all these symptoms, and they were like his stomach, and we went to 3 different emergency rooms, because at the time I was on clinical rotation. So he would just go to the emergency room at whatever hospital I was at around the area. And we got all these different diagnoses, I guess is the proper term. And finally got a diagnosis of Crohn's disease that wasn't biopsy proven. So they just suspected that it was a Crohn's disease. And I can actually remember my pharmacy school graduation day, he was miserable. So like it was really hard, like on a day that I was celebrating something that we had worked toward, that we were getting like the next part of our life, he was like in pain and miserable. And so that was just like leading up to residency. So you graduate in May, residency starts in June, July. And then residency is not the same as medical residency, but it's similar enough to where you work a lot. So it's like 50 to 60 hours a week. He was on medication for Crohn's. He had been on a steroid, which treats Crohn's flare-ups, if you know anything about that. It also treats lymphoma, which is something to talk about in a second. He had changed his medicine, and it was the end of September and early October and at the time I was still very much in the church. And so I remember driving home praying, like, if there is something wrong, it's going to have to be really bad for me to get him into the hospital, because we'd done all the tests, we'd done everything. Like, it has to be bad enough for me to get him convinced, like, we're going to go into the hospital. And I got home, and he was on all fours, like hovered over the recliner in so much pain and had a fever. And he's like, oh no, there's a stomach virus going around at school. And I was like, no, like we're gone. And so it was like September, October of my first year of residency. We go to the emergency room of the hospital where I work. So everyone knows me. And in the ER of that hospital is where they said he had an 18 by 22 centimeter mass in his stomach. And in the not even in a room, like in the ER, like boarding. So the beds were in the hallways. So that was September, October. And then it was 9 months that he passed away. So got diagnosed all during like the first year of my medical training, where I was training to be an oncology cancer pharmacist. So yeah, it was kind of right in the middle.
So sorry. How do you manage the day-to-day in those moments?
That's a tough one. not everyone manages it the same, what I learned. And I think it's exactly that. I just managed, right? I feel like I shifted into a robot. Like I turned off the feeling side and I went into the caregiver side, which I know this isn't the question, but there's still a part of me to this day that feels like I wasn't a wife. Like I was a caregiver and I wasn't a wife. And how do you merge the two? But I also think being trained in healthcare and like I'd already taken care, I knew how to take care of cancer patients. I also knew too much. I knew too much information. And so there was a part that I had to turn off and say, I'm not going to read this article, or like, I'm not going to ask these questions, but also everyone was turning to me at the same time. So I think managing was just managing, but it was also having to channel in on like what I needed, which still feels a little selfish. Because you're the point person, you're the caregiver, but you're also managing all the other dynamics as well. So I really had to just buckle down and just like set my boundaries and stand firm in them for like what we needed and try to make sure like he was getting what he needed, but we were also getting like what we needed as a couple. And yeah, I really think I disassociated from like my feelings a little bit, which we can talk about. But I think I just turned on the survival mode of like advocating and getting things done. And that was a way to kind of to get through.
And when you were going through this period, you said 9 months as he was diagnosed to his passing, and then your grief journey after that, did you feel like there was one moment that was, oh, that was my lowest, that was my rock bottom? Or would you say it was a series of lows that culminated into this whole period of your time that you would consider a rock bottom? This is something I've discussed with many people of like, is rock bottom the right term? Because it's a simple one that everybody knows, but I feel like it's a lot more nuanced than that. And I'd just love to hear your perspective on that and what your experience was.
I would say, I want to know what everyone else said, but I would say that my rock bottom was when my feelings caught up to my head.
Ooh, when was that?
It was when he died. It was like probably 2 weeks before, when like the whole time I had been preparing, he was on hospice. Like I knew he was passing. But starting around that 2 week prior period, I started feeling my feelings come back of like holding on. I wanted to hold on and I wasn't actually ready, even though this whole time, this is what like we were choosing and what we were working toward, but I wasn't actually like emotionally ready. And the moment that he passed, I think was like, I'm going to admit this, but I'm kind of nervous on the cameras, but a lot of people talk about, and I was in hospice. Hospice offers bereavement therapy, so that's a plug. If you're enrolled in hospice, they offer free like bereavement therapy. But one of the things they talked about was, a lot of people when someone passes sit with them or like stay with the person until their soul passes on. Or, welcome y'all. This is what we're talking about. But I couldn't do it. I could not see him that way. And that is hard for me to even like say out loud because it feels shitty. Like it feels like I should have been able to do that. Like that should be something out of love, but like I couldn't. Like his mom was there and I ran out of my front door screaming, crying, down my like bawling, yelling, so much so that a neighbor who was actually a pharmacist at my hospital came out and asked if I was okay. And I was like calling family and like I don't even really remember who I called. But like, I felt so silly because I knew, like the whole time I knew this is what was happening. But in that moment, it felt like the rock bottom because all my feelings culminated like in that moment. And it finally matched with like what my head knew, like my heart was back.
I think there's a misconception that even though you have this timeline and you have the information, it doesn't mean that your brain or your body are ready to be on that schedule. That's something that I definitely learned through my journey is no one could push me towards acceptance. And the further they pushed me, the further I pulled back. And you have to go at your own pace and on your own timeline.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't have anyone, I guess, at the time to like explain that or know that or help me understand that. But I think like that was like the culmination of both was kind of when I felt like my lowest. I will tell you, on the day that he passed, it was like rainy and stormy and cloudy the entire day. And then as soon as he passed, the sun came out, and it was like the most beautiful, like, it just felt, it was like, you also feel relief, which, you feel guilt about as well. But it felt like it was happened how it was supposed to.
I think what you're describing is very human and very honest, and something complicated emotions that people don't usually talk about when someone close to them passes. And so I really appreciate you going there.
That's what we're here for.
And thinking about, I think a lot of people in these circumstances like to think there is a kind of blueprint for this kind of process, right? Kate talked about her timeline and how it just couldn't be pushed, and the more it was, she just pulled away. So what was your journey of grief like from that moment on?
What was it like, or what is it like?
What was it? Yeah.
Oh gosh, how long do I have? No.
How hungry are we?
Yeah. What was my journey of grief like? It was hard, freaking hard. First of all, I had to become grief literate. So I had to learn what things were, what I feel like I went through a lot of, like, is this normal? Is this my grief? Like, is this, how is this a normal 27-year-old? Because I was 27. Is this a normal, like, 27-year-old feeling? Is it not? So just trying to find people in my life to kind of help validate how I was feeling was a huge part of the journey of, like, ups and downs. There were a lot of lows. There were a lot of buckling down and just working, or trying to just do the thing. Like, I was in residency, right? So just get back into it and finish that, because that's what you're supposed to do. I think I dealt with it in my way. So if we want to get really deep, there's different, like, models of grief. So one is called the dose response model, and it says that basically we handle grief in the doses that we can handle it in the moment, and we oscillate between those. So, like, sometimes we're in it, and then sometimes we put it aside and compartmentalize, and we, go on with our life. And I feel like that is what my grief journey was like. It was a lot of small doses, which it's really cool if you get into the science of that as, like, our brain and our body's way of protecting us, right? And so it makes sense that it kind of unloads in small doses. So I feel like that was what my grief journey was like. I think those were really small doses over the first couple of years, and just, like, buckling down, doing the things I needed, and ignoring all the other things. COVID hit at a weird time in my grief journey. And weirdly, I was okay.
At what point during the journey did
Okay,
COVID
so he
hit?
passed in 2017. I moved to Denver in 2018 for a year of residency. I moved here in 2019, August, and then COVID is, like, the following March. So COVID was interesting because I swear I didn't take this from the book What My Bones Know, because I just finished it. But I actually remember feeling like, wow, I feel fine. Like, I feel weirdly okay. And, like, everyone else is struggling. And, like, yeah, it was hard, but also this feels kind of like my last couple of years, And so that was an interesting point in the grief journey. And I think once I started realizing later in the grief journey that I was, like, checking out by working and by doing these certain things when I didn't really know who I was, that's when the dose of what I dealt with, like, I really focused in on reestablishing myself. So I would say within the last 3 years, the grief journey has looked a lot like new identity. Who am I? Like, what do I enjoy doing? What do I believe? Because I've actually had the bandwidth to start doing some of that.
It's a beautiful process, reestablishing yourself. That's a real...
And it was because of, like, the dose that I could handle at the time, right? And I mean, it's still a thing. Like, there's still days, there's still moments. I was home a couple weeks ago and walked into a restaurant that we all ate at, and it was my brother's birthday. And, like, I was walking up to the table with my family, and, like, it's always the elephant in the room. And is it hard? Like, yeah, I guess, but it's just there. Like, it just always exists. So I believe that, like, my grief journey will always be a part of me, and that doesn't mean I can't live a full and abundant life and with a partner and love, like that. It doesn't replace that. It's just kind of like coexisting. Yeah.
Now, my favorite question, because I've become obsessed with different modalities of healing throughout my year and couple odd months. And I think it's the hardest question.
It is the hardest question. I'm not ready for this.
Because when I asked myself, I couldn't do it. if you had to boil it down to the 3 top things that helped you heal, and you can make sweeping wide buckets if you need to, what would those 3 things be?
I think this is hard also because I think it depends on what like the healing you're seeking. I would say find a good therapist. And I know that it sucks, right? I know that it takes time. I think I went through 3 different ones, and then finally I met one, and she was like, I was like ready for here's this. And like, this is what I was ready to tell her my whole story. And she was like, what do you need today? I don't care. We'll get to all that. But like, where are you today? And I was like, yes. And she is still my therapist to this day. And actually her analogy of grief, this is circling back on the last question, I'm sorry, but I love so much was that grief is like if you have a bookcase and you just have like one book on it, and that's grief, and it's pretty empty all around, and that's your whole bookcase is this book on grief. And your grief journey is like when you start filling in the missing pieces of the bookcase. And there's actually a visual, I should have put it on the slides, that goes along with it, where it's still there, but you have all these other pieces of your life surrounding it, and you have, it's filling up the bookcase with the other things, and it still will always be there, but it's less like it's not your focal point, right? So therapy, highly advocate, but find someone that you relate with, that understands you, that, doesn't spill their details as well, right? Like they focus it on you, and there's those personal, professional boundaries. And I didn't start that one even until like probably 3 or 4 years out. So it can still be helpful whenever you're ready, right? Like whenever you are ready and willing. For me, it was memoirs and books, which I know isn't a healing, like necessarily like on the list of healing modalities, but it was reading people, not the scientific one. I mean, they're great, but not the ones that you can't put down, memoir and books, like the people that have been through it, that make it funny or that make it like normalize it. I didn't have any 27-year-old widows that I could find, and I lived in a small town in Kentucky, and I went to one young adult widows support group after Tom died, and I was late, which I always am. So like, shout out to the people in the room that know that about me and still love me. But I walked to it, and no one was there. So I don't know if it was canceled, but then I just left bawling because I just felt more alone. And so the only place I had to turn really were books, so find someone that's gone through what you've gone through, and knows how to talk about it. I can give you a whole list. And then the third modality I don't know if this counts either, but I would say people. And I think if I could, it's hard because I feel like the further I get away from it, the harder it is to remember. But something in you clicks when you're in survival mode. And like, I could meet a person and within 1 minute know like, you get it or you don't get it, and I didn't have time at that point in my life for the people that didn't get it. And I know that seems rude and insensitive. And I knew that I would come back around to them. And like at some point that relationship would be what it was. But at the time I did not have the bandwidth for it. And so find the people that get it. And I could list out like all the people and what they helped me with, right? So if I knew if I had this one thing, this is who I would call. Or if I had a question about, did I make the wrong decision with Tom's treatment? Like this person is my person. Or if I had, this need, I would call this person. And I had people that dropped everything and just like showed up. And if you can find those people, like I think that is really healing, which is why we're doing things like connection and community here.
I had a very similar experience where it's like some people I could resonate with and relate to, and some people it would just frustrate me. And then I talked to someone who had her own grief journey, and she was like, yes, and keep those people in your back pocket when you need a break. Yeah. When you need a break from going through it and you want something lighter and you don't have the capacity to relate on that level, go find those people that can keep it up here. So just to add on to that about what those people can be along your journey for you.
So speaking of people, connection is wonderful, but it can also be kind of maddening in the sense of you get thrown advice at you all the time about how you should deal with it, about how you should think about it, etc. I'm sure most of it is not useful, but was there one piece of advice that you remember receiving where you were like, you know what, that That feels perfect.
I do. And I'm trying to remember how he worded it. So there was one person that he was a year actually above me in pharmacy school, and his wife passed from breast cancer. And I remember him reaching out and finally was like, yes, let's go get coffee. Like I need, and it was while Tom was passing. And again, grief terms like I didn't know what the things were. And also I feel like even now, 7 years later, just society, we talk about things a lot differently. We talk about our emotions. We talk about trauma and like all that stuff. That was not a thing in 2017 as much, at least not in Kentucky. But he taught me what anticipatory grief was. And he said, do not feel guilty for like doing what you need right now, or do not feel guilty for like following what your heart needs, because no one understands like what you're going through. And I remember exactly where we were sitting when he said that. And I think I just started bawling because that was exactly what I was juggling family. You know, we were young, like I was juggling family. And there's also this thing about grief and trauma that shit hits the fan when like things that weren't healthy before, right? Like relationships that you think are healthy, or maybe like it's just little things like boundaries or things with your family or whatever, that when you're there, you just push it under the rug and then you leave and like it's fine. When things like big things happen, those things all get heightened. And so all of those problems become identified as well. And so you're managing not only what you're going through, but then also all these like problems that you didn't realize were problems, but now they are. So I think hearing just like it's okay to do what your heart needs at this moment, and like don't feel bad about doing what you need, was just exactly what I needed to hear, because I was raised in like where you sacrifice, or you like, you know, you don't do what you need first, right? Like that's selfish. And so just trying to like reverse that psychology of like knowing that I had to take care of myself so that I could take care of Tom and everything else, like be priority.
And were there any well-intentioned folks who gave some advice that wasn't helpful, and or how can people show up for others when they're grieving?
Yeah. Don't say sorry for your loss. Don't say you're so strong. You know, I think a lot of those grief pleasantries is what we like to call them, or those phrases, they mean well. I think the other thing that is similar to like issues becoming bigger, more more apparent when you go through something, is that, and I was just talking about this like earlier this week, is that you also revert to like the time you were the closest with the person when you go through grief or hard things. So for example, let's say like a friend gets cancer, but like it's not someone you talk to, but because they have cancer, now you feel like you need to reach out or talk to them. Don't do that, maybe. And maybe some people like it. For me, I did not. And that's the hard thing about grief, is that everyone is different. But they're already managing so many things. If you don't have a direct, like super great relationship with them in this moment, it's probably just going to be more overwhelming than it is going to be helpful. And I know that it's from a good place, and a lot of times we mean well, but sometimes maybe wait until like people have phased out, right? And be the person that shows up later, or just do something without it having to be like like someone knows that you did it. Or it's going to take bandwidth, because like texting and saying, I'm going to drop this by, or like, that is taking like energy and bandwidth from the situation. I don't know. Did that make sense?
Yeah, that's helpful.
Was there a particular moment that you remember that you got the sense that you were starting to feel like you were healing? What was that like?
Yes. Kind of a weird moment, but it was beautiful, I think. So at the time, the moment that I have always struggled with anxiety, and like that's something, you know, to unpack as well. And in therapy, it's a lot like, well, was this here before the death, or like, is it here now, or like, was this pre-Tom, or has this always been an issue, or what is this associated with? And we talk about it as like a ball of yarn, you know, it's very like tangled, and trying to unpack it. So anxiety has always been kind of something, and flights make me a little nervous. Okay. And so the like getting on a flight, not being able to communicate, like if it crashes, like you're probably gonna not be alive. And I don't say that lightly, because I know that that's a real thing. But there was a point in time where I was traveling a lot for residency interviews, and I was flying, and I was like, I don't really care if this plane crashes. I just really don't. Like, I'm not actively seeking it, but I also don't really care. Like, my husband passed away. Like, I'm good. I am fine if this plane crashes. And then I was in a relationship, and at one point I was flying, and all of a sudden I was like, man, I'm anxious again. Mm. And that made me realize that I was like, my feelings were back. Like, I cared. If there was someone that I cared about leaving, or there was someone on the ground, like, I was starting to feel again. And yeah, it wasn't the best feeling, like anxiety of plane, but it made me realize that I wasn't like on autopilot anymore, and that I actually like felt again, and I wasn't dissociated from that, and I had something to live for, something or someone to live for.
It's an amazing reframe of anxiety, right? It's like, oh, my feelings are back. This is uncomfortable.
Like, oh, I feel, like, oh, wait. And I remember like thinking that, like, whoa, like this is different, like maybe I don't know. So yeah.
Amazing.
Tell us about Just Okay.
What do you want to know?
Everything. What is it? How did it start?
Just Okay. So that's also a long story. And Emily, I don't even know if you know this. I have some people in the room, but Just Okay started out of I think you had texted me about, like, I have a friend, like, what do you recommend? And I think that same week I had gotten 3 or 4 different texts of like, I have a friend going through this, or, I have a friend whose husband's passing, or, what books do you recommend, or what do you recommend? And I was like, first of all, I still don't know. Like, even going through it, I still don't know. I might know better, but I still don't know. And second of all, why does this not exist? Like, why is there not a space you can go to say, like, hey, this is like what we're going through, what do you recommend? And I think and I know that the best way to find that is through meeting people and talking about it, and that can be really hard to do. And like, yes, you can walk into Barnes & Noble and say, where's your grief section? But if you ask the person, they're not going to know anything about the books, right? Or they're not going to know anything about what they recommend. And so I was like, this is something like that we culturally, I was at my grandma's funeral, and my mom is getting like bird feeders and wind chimes, right? And so like I mix that, and I'm like, culturally, like, could we not really do a better job than like bird feeders and wind chimes? Like, that's still what we're doing. There's not a better gift. Like, my mom was like, I hate wind chimes. No offense if you like them. But my grandma had written a little note, and they read it at the funeral, and it was basically like, take a risk. And I was like, this is it. Like, I have to do it. I have to start something where we talk about it. And I have followed the grief, like, social media space for a really long time. And I've seen a lot out there, but I still don't feel like there's actionable steps for like a space. And so that was where Just Okay was birthed. I was at kind of a point in my career where I felt like I also had never really like taken time to figure out who I was, and that I was just using work to dissociate at the end of the day versus deal with it. And I was using it under the bridge of like fulfillment, because this is, we'll call it like cancer care, and like and I was doing that, right? But I also I didn't know who I was, and I realized I'd never stopped and pressed pause and said, okay, who are you now after this event? You just kept going on with your life. Like, who are you? What do you want? And in doing so, I've rediscovered myself. I've been able to start Just Okay, and all these things have fallen into place. And so Just Okay is a space. Kristen, can you press the next slide? Thank you. I have it. So the logo is Tom's handwriting. So that's my husband's handwriting. It is a space, really, this is not helpful, sorry, but it's a website, and then a community space. So if you go on that QR code, there's an online space. It's very new because this is my launch, but essentially it would be like an online, almost Facebook community where you can go in and talk about things that have been helpful to you. So there's a place to introduce yourself. There's a place to, like, different places depending on what grief is, because I'm also here to say I believe grief is so many things that we mislabel it as. I lost my husband and being a widow, and death is grief. We think about death as being grief. That makes sense. But I think divorce, friendship loss, job loss, pet loss. I mean, there's so many forms that we all felt grief during COVID, right? Any different loss or transition can still be grief. So there's all different channels on that space for you to connect with other people, to share resources or things that have been helpful for you so that we can get to talking about it and hopefully make a difference in how we're talking about grief. The other part of Just Okay is to try to fix the problem of like, where can I go to find stuff for people? Okay. And what this looks like is a very small level at first. So my big dreams, it feels almost like I'm scared and failure because it's not what I want it to be, but we'll get there. I'm working with a girl, a company, and she's been super helpful. So what I want it to look like is to highlight small businesses that are doing stuff in the grief space. The first picture on the left, this is Good Grief Running. It's actually a run club here in Austin. They run on Mondays at 7 a.m. That is their merch, and I'm going to be selling it because I think it's super cool that they're doing that, and I want to highlight and promote their business for like connection in the grief space. So Good Grief Run Club, I have their merch, and I know that that's not like a product for grief, but it's also just supporting like a small business doing something in the space. So I'm here for that. The company in the middle, it's a girl named Lisa. She's actually out of, I believe it's Fort Collins, Colorado. She lost her sister and had a candle making business and was like, I'm going to make candles specifically for like death. So she has birthday candles and like death anniversary candles. But I'm going to be making my own candle plug. It's going to be called the Leave the Light On candle for those people in your life that you had to step away from, but for you to come back to. But a candle, and I know, again, it's a candle, right? That seems silly. But the question mark here, the idea is that I will connect with all these small businesses and artists that are doing cool things in the grief space and use the community page to get information from breast cancer survivors or people that have been through infertility and like what was actually helpful to them, and then to kind of market that back into the marketplace. So think like an Etsy or a concentrated grief or a concentrated spot, but just for like the grief and loss space. And then really the rest, I don't know, we'll have to see. I think there's so much opportunity for like talking about death doulas and like alternative things to funerals, right? And there's so many ways that it could go. But I think all of that is the point is to build a community and get word of mouth and like help build it together.
How can people get involved?
So you can go back, Kristen, sorry. Follow that. Instagram is been live. The website is live as of yesterday. And then you can join the free community space and more to come there. And there's also a sign up over on the table over here for email if you want to join the newsletter. But really the best involvement, Dan, I'm stealing this one from you, is just sharing, talking about it. I think, again, I don't have all the answers still, and I think there's a fear of that. It's like, oh, I'm starting this business, I should know this answer. But the point is just to start having the conversations to find what's actually helpful and what people have been reading or used, or like what gift they found that was like people really enjoyed, because I think we can do better than coloring books and
wind chimes.
Yeah, and wind chimes. And, I know we mean well, like I'm not saying that, but I think.
Are you going to stock bird feeders?
Am I going to stock them?
Are you going to have bird feeders?
I don't think so.
You leave them behind?
If you make them.
Okay.
I just want to acknowledge Laura because this is actually her first time sharing her story about her husband's passing. So I want to give Laura a round of applause. You did amazing.
Thank you. I would say it's not my first time, but it's the first time that I feel in control of it. I think for a long time, and I am very open with students also, just because I feel like I put my life on hold, and that was, we think we have control and we don't, and we were like, oh, I'll just get through this and I'll just get through this, but the truth is, it's like we have to live every day. So I've shared it, but I think a lot of times that's been from a place of not knowing where to put it and feeling like I had to share it because I didn't know it was my life. Like that was everything about me, and now it's not. And in a way that feels like weird to say out loud, but also beautiful, because I have more control over my story versus just word bombing in it, because I feel like I'm trauma dumping and I don't know how else to be. There's a lot more books on the shelf.
Oh yeah.
In both meanings, like actually and.
So we have a little tradition with Open Spaces that we ask the previous guest to ask a question of the present guest. Okay, so the question from our last speaker at Open Spaces is, because stigmatizing people going through grief and trauma has such negative consequences to individuals, what can we do as members of society to end the stigma and discrimination against people going through those challenges?
I think talk about it. I think I was just listening to, I have a playlist that was actually Tom's, like, that we would play towards the end of life. I was just listening to a song, and it literally was like, I feel like I have all this on my heart, like, does everyone else, right? Like, and that wasn't the words. They were better, and I screenshotted them, but I don't know where my phone is. But basically, it's like we all carry it around, and we're all kind of, looking around like, I feel like this, like, to other people. And I think to destigmatize it is to just say, like, hey, me too. And I think Brene Brown said once, and this we can talk about if we agree or disagree with this later. But she was like, someone told me once, everyone's doing their best. And, I think if you just try to view it that everyone's doing their best in the moment, like maybe that is their best because they're dealing with so many other things, right? And so kind of like reframing, if we're mad or if we're overwhelmed or if we're frustrated, like maybe that's their best in this moment, and like don't immediately jump to this conclusion of like stigma or judgment or, like this could be their best in this moment. And instead of maybe getting mad, be curious about why. Because maybe they're going through something, maybe they're struggling, and just try to have more like conversations like we're doing, like this event. It's like coming here tonight, this is a way to destigmatize it. Sharing what you've gone through, talking openly about it. And I know that feels uncomfortable, but I think the people in this room are a safe space to start. So trying to find people where you can do that, or whatever outlet, if it's music or write or poetry or whatever. Yeah.
Community forums.
Yeah. Community spaces.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to open it up. If there's any questions, take just a couple minutes and then we'll have dinner. Deanne.
You mentioned you had this spiritual relationship with God growing up. Did it change at all after he died?
It did. Yeah. I remember sitting on my front porch realizing, and like, I was basically born in the church, like if we could say that. I remember going through it being frustrated with, not with God, but with like the way that we have put God in a box. I remember the actual feeling of thinking like, I think it's so much bigger than what we've made it. I think God is so much bigger than like the box that we've put him into, or the universe, or whatever, however you want to view it. But we've tried to condense it into this box of rules. And I think at the end of the day, like it's so much bigger than that. Yep.
Yes.
How did you find hope in all of this? Like, how did you pull yourself away from like anger and hurt and resentment and sadness and find hope to like move yourself forward?
I feel like I didn't have a choice in a way. I don't know if it's like I sought out hope. I think it was I was really young. So I think for me, my hope came from new experiences or like things that I haven't tried, or like little things like pieces that would give me something to like, wow. Because I tell people a lot, and it's not actually like this now. So that's kind of cool. But when I was first meeting people, I had all this social anxiety because people would talk about bands or like things. And I'm like, I have no idea who this is, because there was such a part of life I hadn't explored. And so I think the hope portion for me came in the form of like meeting people that would give me little glimpses of things that like I hadn't tried, and trying to be curious about that. And I would love to sit here and say like, oh, I forced myself to be curious. That's like something about me innately. Like I think from, my upbringing and all that stuff. But I think hope came from like curiosity of how can I use this and what's more out there that like I haven't experienced. I don't know if that was the best answer, but.
Ginger?
You mentioned different things of what not to say to someone that someone has passed. What would you say is better thing to say?
Yeah, I think saying like, just like thinking about you, or I'm here, or what can I do for you today? Or like, hey, I noticed this was done. I took care of it, right? It's like trying to anticipate. It depends on your relationship with the person, but trying to anticipate something that they might need and just not communicating with them, but just doing it. So I think that was one of the questions. On the day that Tom passed away, his surgeon actually, someone texted him and let him know. I showed up at my house. And he just, chilled and hung out like he had formed a relationship with Tom. And then like about 30 minutes in, he was like, y'all hungry? We were like, actually, yeah. Like, no, he was like, great, pizza's on the way. And so it's not even about what you say, but I think it's about like just kind of taking things in that might be needed and accomplishing those. I think it's also safe to say, like, I know you feel helpless. Try to validate, like, with your words, what they're going through, not just something like thoughts and prayers, because that to me feels like I'm checking it off my to-do list that I sent my good deeds, but saying like, hey, I know you're going through a lot. Like, you got this, or I'm here. What can I do for you today? There's a really good post on my Instagram that I wish I had memorized that just had all of this stuff on it. So if you check it out, check out the Instagram. But there's some suggestions on there as well. Don't tell them I'm marketing girl. Yes?
I love the idea of the leave the light on candle. That like spoke to me a lot. And you talked about coming back to relationships, or like, can you kind of talk about like the relationships you left behind and like how you've reconnected?
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea, I totally stole it from Maggie Rogers' song. So Leave the Light On. That's my grief song. She wrote it about, I believe, trying to like make it in music and having to leave a lot of friendships. She didn't have the time for friendships. And it was like, leave the light on for that. Yeah, my family, like there are a lot of relationships. And I'm here to say that like for a few years, I didn't have a great relationship with my family. And I was at their house last weekend, and so I think it's taken 5 years or so to rebuild that relationship. But I think just leaving the space open, they have to as well, right? So it's not a one-sided thing. There's friends that didn't communicate in the way that we needed, and yeah, we're not as close, but we still like communicate. Was your question more about like how did I do it, or just about in general, like
just in general, like relationships maybe that faltered during that time that like you've been able to come back to?
Yeah, and I think you just have to trust that you will in time, and you can also like communicate. If there's a person say, hey, I love you, this just isn't what I need right now, but I promise I'll be back. And leaving the space open to do that. And sometimes you might not be back, right? Because there's a lot of relationships. For me, I physically changed locations. So there's a lot that we connect, but we're not going to be in the same way because I'm such a different person at this point. And what we had relationship over doesn't exist anymore. But I think you just have to navigate it and be willing to be open. And also there were times where I had to say I was sorry. Like, I apologize. There were times where I did have to say, hey, I get it. This is what I was going through. And to be also very honest, there's still relationships that I haven't, that I know that those are on the list of things that like I need to do. So it was a good question.
All right.
Any other?
You're amazing.
You're amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex and Kate. I really appreciate it. And this is the next step in like putting it out there. I think I'm a little hesitant to do things like this. So trying to move forward, and thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you for being here. I'm so proud of you.
Yeah, thank you all.